Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fully Charged Show podcast. Before we dive in today, this has just happened very recently, in the last couple of days. The team that help run the Fully Charged Show, and they're amazing, and Jesse, who is the wonderful editor of this of the podcast and the news episodes, they've been looking at the comments that we receive on, when you download the audio podcast, and we've been asking on Apple podcasts and other things. We've just been asking people to give us some reviews, some 5-star reviews if you want, and that's lovely. And they are amazing. I can't believe it. We've had a lot, and it really makes a difference. It's really nice for us to see that, to get that bit of feedback about the podcast, because obviously the podcast is a bit overshadowed by the main show, but the podcast has become kind of popular and really exciting, and we're getting some brilliant people on it, and we've got some brilliant people coming. So if you are of a mind and you download the audio, or if you want to leave a comment on the YouTube version, if you can give us a 5-star review and just go, I had sausages, vegan sausages for tea with I don't know, anything, doesn't really matter, but the 5-star review bit, the 5-star bit is the important bit, and we've had a lot, and it's really helped, and our listenership has increased very markedly since we've been doing that. And obviously we'd love you to subscribe and all those things, but it's been really, really heartwarming to read the comments. Really, really wonderful. Thank you very much for the people who have left these comments. We really appreciate them. Today's guest on the show has just been a real joy to meet him. So he was at Fully Charged Live in Farnborough for our digital fireside chat first thing in the morning when the crowds arrived, and it was wonderful to talk to him. He's such an extraordinary and talented communicator about complicated topics. So he runs a very successful YouTube channel in the UK called Just Have a Think. His name is David Borlace, and he is a really calm, charming, delightful man who does really proper, deep research into the topic that he talks about before he talks about it. Just trying to think of someone who doesn't sometimes quite match up to that, who might possibly go on vague understanding of a topic and then being full of opinions. I can't think who I'm talking about. But so it was a real delight to meet Dave, and he was a charming guest on that, and I really wanted him to come on the podcast, and we've had an amazing conversation. He is just great joy to talk about, and we were I was determined to end, because a lot of the stuff he's talking about, it's a lot of common ground between Just Have a Think and the Fully Charged Show. So a lot of the technologies that he investigates and the concepts and all that are very similar, but I was trying to end on an optimistic note, because generally that's the point of both our shows, is to be optimistic, but we ended on a bit of a down note, just because the challenges we face as the human race are, I'd classify them as chunky, quite chunky. And as I mentioned, I think in the recording in the episode this time, that I am genuinely desperate to agree with and believe in the climate skeptics and the people who say it's all nonsense. I just want them to be right. And I want the vast, vast majority of scientists around the world who are extraordinarily concerned about what's going on in the world and seeing the changes in the climate and everything connected to it. I want them to be wrong. I want them to be a load of conspiratorial lizards that are trying to crush our freedom. That would be so much better than what we're clearly facing. So on that lovely, happy, optimistic note, please welcome to the Fully Charged podcast, Mr. Dave Borlace. So, Dave, thanks so much for joining us today on the show. It's, we just to explain to people who weren't in the room, we did a fireside chat, a digital fireside chat. Obviously, we weren't burning anything, Dave. There was nothing being burnt. at Fully Charged Live in Farnborough, which was just it was a real joy and a great success. The audience loved it. A lot of people commented afterwards, and I had very good feedback on it. But no, so I just wanted to get you on the channel, and I've explained, your channel and what you do, and it is amazing. I'm just basically, I think I mentioned this when we were together, so I don't want to rehash too much of it. But when I try and explain things that are quite complicated, I try and channel you, and then I realise about 1.5 seconds in, I've failed miserably because I'm going, and the other thing, I'm ranting away, and I go, just stay calm and just explain it. Yeah, so you do have a wonderful skill in that.
Oh, thank you. Well, it is by Wednesday. I mean, I do the research starting on it. Usually start on a Sunday and work through, and by Wednesday I'm sort of finishing off a script. But if I'm going through something like a scientific paper, and I'm trying to, one of the sort of aims of the channel is to get them down into language that you and I could understand.
Yeah.
By Wednesday, if I had any hair, I'd be tearing it out and crying in a corner and rocking gently. I don't understand. What do you mean the gangle pin goes to the sprog socket? What sprog socket?
You never mentioned
every Wednesday. Yeah, exactly. And then after reading it about 50 times, I've gradually got it to something that makes. And often I contact the scientists themselves and say, "Can you just talk me through this? Because I don't know what you're talking about, mate." But holding that in your mind afterwards, after you've done a video, you know what it's like. You do a video and you're immediately onto the next video. So that whole process that you did last week is sort of, dissolves into the ether of history, and you're already into the next script, and your mind's into something else. So coming to Fully Charged Live, for example, I was conscious that we were going to be talking to proper grown-ups and who knew stuff, and I thought, well, I better know what I'm talking about. So I did quite a lot of research for that, or revision, should I say, of research I'd done, and trying to keep facts and figures in my head, and some stay in there, Robert, and some fall out. I'm afraid. I'm 54. What can I tell you?
Yes. I know. Don't wait. That was. I'm not going to admit who it was, but I said to Dan Caesar the other day, we really should get XXX onto the podcast because he's amazing. You've just seen what he's just said, and he went, he was on the podcast 4 months ago. Actually, no, that's not fair. It wasn't 4 months. It was over a year, but it wasn't that long, and I had totally forgotten. And that's what happens as the hair and the brain cells fade.
Yeah, I'm afraid so.
No, here's one of the topics that I know you've covered on your channel, and that I was thinking about this morning, completely unrelated to that, was about the migration crisis, in the English Channel and in the Mediterranean, and why are those people heading north, which is basically what they're doing. And then I saw that you'd done a thing about global food production, and I'm in a farming area. I have not this year, but in last year, I had long conversations with two of our farmers who were talking about the difficulties they're facing with, and this is not the political economic difficulties, it's growing stuff and how that's more and more challenging, and they're not sure what to do, and they're changing their crops, and the temperature is different. I mean, it's a good example today. It's an extremely hot day here in the UK. But so I don't know what I had, but I haven't had the chance to watch that episode. So what was that? Was that about the kind of global food crisis that we could well be facing?
Partly, I mean, so it's about what that was specifically about what impact the climate, the warming atmosphere is having on that whole thing. But it's not just climate change. That's a huge subject. So some people say we've only got 40 or 50 harvests left because of the way, but not necessarily because of the warming atmosphere, but because of the way we have abused the soil for actually thousands of years since we changed from hunter-gatherers to agricultural and animal domesticators after the last ice age 10,000 years ago. And we grew the great civilizations grew up, Egyptians and the Romans, you name it. We've been abusing the soil by chucking stuff in it and growing stuff as fast as possible to feed people, rather than hunting animals and having a nomadic lifestyle, which is what we used to do, and therefore leaving areas of land to recover. We've plonked ourselves down, grown great civilizations, and obviously then we got the Industrial Revolution and suddenly went whoop in an exponential curve of population growth, as we all know about. But sedentary in the same place, so we're using the same soil to try and feed ever more people, and to do that, the expedient way of doing that is to chuck lots of nitrogen and phosphate, fertilizers on there and kill everything else with pesticides. That's only a very short-term quick fix. It really kills the soil. So that's part of the problem, and we've been doing that regardless of climate change. So we're already giving ourselves a huge problem. Add to that the warming atmosphere that's causing not just so for every 1 degree Celsius of warming, an atmosphere can hold on to 7% more moisture. But that's another statistic that does stick in my head, thankfully. But that 7% extra water doesn't spread itself
evenly,
nicely around the globe to do us a favour. It clumps together with the weather systems. So a perfect example is the north of Italy. When we were actually at the Harrogate show that week, the north of Italy was experiencing half a year's worth of rain in something like 36 hours.
Because they had terrible floods.
Absolutely catastrophic, But that same area of Italy same time last year, was in extreme drought.
Right.
So because the water had gone off and caused havoc and mayhem somewhere else on the planet. And it's the same in America. So you've got, 2019, they had a polar vortex disaster, an Arctic bomb of cold froze the whole of America in the winter of 2019. So they couldn't plant the crops in the ground. Right. Then in the spring, it thawed out, and then it just rained for about 4 months solid. So it was really difficult to get crops in the ground then. And then they got to summer, and they had extreme drought and heat, which killed all the crops anyway. So they were, something like at some point in the year, they were only 54% of what they needed to plant to get the crops growing to feed the nation. They got lots of stored grain in America, but that won't last forever. So it was a perfect example, and Italy's another example. And you can talk about Africa and India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, all those, even China.
Yeah.
So everywhere across the tropical sort of equatorial regions, and some little pockets further north like America, we've got this massive problem where it's parched earth or torrential. We've got a cyclone hitting Pakistan and in northwest India today.
Right.
There's thousands of people evacuated right now.
Wow. And
it's happening all over the place, and it's completely chaotic, and it's very difficult to legislate for, or it's certainly impossible to mitigate for now. We're past that point. It's in the atmosphere. So and I'm rambling a bit now, but the point is, we've got a global food system that relies on almost just-in-time, distribution links with great big freight containers all over the world, bringing food from A to B, thousands and thousands of miles. And our economies are reliant, and obviously our people are reliant on those food chains. Yeah. And once that starts to break down, doesn't matter how many billions and squillions of dollars you've got, and what hideaway you've got somewhere in the middle of nowhere, or you've got New Zealand citizenship or whatever you've managed to do because you've got gazillions of dollars. If you haven't got any food to eat or water to drink, you're going to die. Yeah. So that's fundamentally one of the biggest problems we face, and that's why the people in the lowest hanging fruit that nature will kill first are the people in the warmest tropical equatorial regions, and that's why one of the reasons why they're moving north. And you could say, well, a lot of them are moving north because of conflict, which is true, but a lot of that conflict is because of resource limitations like food and water.
Yeah, no, it is a truly horrifying prospect in a way, and I mean that's I am always have been, and I'm increasingly desperate to believe the most rabid climate change denier, pro fossil fuel, rabid conspiracy theorist waving a flag and screaming in my face, it's all a lie and we're ruled by lizards. I want them to be right.
Yeah, and I know you're being facetious, but actually that is a typical reaction of the vast majority of human beings. Yeah. The news is so appalling and frightening that it's actually a lot easier to just pretend it's not happening. Because it's too much. It's too much for the human psyche.
Only one individual.
And there's no evolutionary preparation for this. We haven't faced this.
No.
Since the last ice age, we've never faced it actually as a settled agricultural society, because we have had big temperature fluctuations many tens and tens of thousands of years ago, but we were nomadic then, and there was only a few million of us. Yeah. So we just used to, like buffalo and any other animal, we just used to move away from inhospitable areas to where it was hospitable on a seasonal basis. We just followed the water and the food like the animals do. So we've got no sphere of reference for something as cataclysmic as 1 or even 2 or possibly 2.7 or 3 degrees of warming, which is what our current policies are taking us to by 2100. Right. We've never experienced that. So there's no capacity hardwired into the human brain to be able to assimilate that information or think about what to do about it. And we could go on for hours about the emotional side of the brain and the intellectual side of the brain, critical thinking. We don't do critical thinking unless we really try hard. We do instinctive, emotional thinking, which is whatever's in front of your face, react to that. Don't worry about what's in the future. We'll deal with that later. And that's not a good thing to have when you're dealing with climate change.
No. I think it's, fairly obvious that our children are not best pleased with our generation. I've noticed a small amount of caustic criticism in the kitchen when my kids visit.
I've just done a video called "Are Future Humans Really Our Problem?" ? Right. It hasn't gone out yet. It's going out on I think the 9th of July. And there's a guy called Johan Rockström who is the leader of the Potsdam Institute of Climate Research. He's a very famous guy in the climate world. And he and his team have just released a report that's looking at the future consequences. Right. And the sort of thrust of my argument is in fact, I'll very briefly tell a story about it. When a long time ago, I did something called Part P, which is to train as a house electrician, domestic electrical appliances and stuff. And that legislation, Part P of the electrical regulations, came about in about the early 2000s. And one of the MPs that voted for it, her daughter was electrocuted in her home because 5 years previously an electrician had laid a wire from an extractor fan at an angle across their wall. Right. And obviously it had been rendered, it had been plastered over so you couldn't see it. And then the husband came along 2 years later, screwed a metal dish rack to the wall, thinking he was in a safe zone. Yeah. Just nicked the cable with a screw, didn't make contact, but as it moved over the years, the screw came into contact with the live conductor. Wife came along, put a metal spatula on her. Her bare foot happened to be touching the metal front of her dishwasher, made a circuit, killed her instantly.
Oh my God.
And my thrust was, the question is, should the electrician that laid that wire be held responsible for the death of that woman 5 years later? And it's a very good analogy for what we're doing now. We're treating the future a bit like that electrician treated that wire. It's like, well, it's not my problem. I'll lay it and then I'll skedaddle and it'll be 5 years down the line and, not my problem. And that's kind of the mentality we've got. So I'm not surprised our children are irritated with us, not just for causing the problem, but not for not really showing much willingness to really start making radical changes that can alleviate it either.
Yeah. No, I mean the torrents of no, it's not even. It's not nasty stuff. It's just people desperately don't want to change. And so when you talk about, that's not new, but whenever we mention something about, which we never do, but about climate change, but about electric vehicles, the kickback at the moment is because I think the 2030 ban in the UK is the reality of that is appearing on people's horizons. Yeah. So the kind of the bulldozer of excuses, and they're all legitimate, because they're more economic. They go, well, I can't afford an electric car. You can't force me at gunpoint to buy one. And and you go, well, that isn't quite the point, even though it's just. But but it is going to just get bigger and bigger and bigger. And now the arguments that fossil fuel isn't that bad and it's all a con, and it's the fuel that's and all those things. And I mean, what's difficult is I've heard it before so many times, and I can't. I've lost the will to discuss it, on that level. It's just not possible to deal with it. But
I mean, what we can guarantee is whatever levers can be pulled by our friends in the fossil fuel industry, they are very, very adept at pulling them. And at the moment, they've got a lot of levers that they can pull. They're tugging at a lot of heartstrings, as you've just described. Even car parks collapsing, Robert. I mean, for goodness sake. I saw your rant on that, and I was fully compliant, and I completely agree with you. It's absolute bloody nonsense.
Well, it is. It's only. I mean, I wasn't completely sure because it makes sense. You hear it. Oh yeah, the batteries are heavy. I've heard that. And then I just looked up about 15 big SUVs. They're way heavier than any electric car that's ever been made. But not by like 4 kilos, by 250 kilos heavy or 500 kilos heavy. You go, and where I live, we are surrounded by massive 3-ton SUVs being driven at high speed by one person.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But we need the government. This is where, in my opinion, I don't want to get too political, but we need central governments to really support this transition in a way that ours isn't, America's is, and the EU's is starting to as well. You look at their, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Green Deal industrial plan in the EU, billions of dollars and euros in subsidies and incentives, not just for domestic people like you and me, but for corporations to do the right thing. And they're pulling big companies towards them by issuing these incentives. And some complain of protectionism, which is absolutely true.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do?
Yeah. Because I haven't got China on my list of topics, but we could do that. But the other one I'd love to just go over, because I've heard so much about it, and I was at a conference. I'm just trying to now remember where. Oh no, I was at the Cheltenham Science Festival. A discussion panel, which was really interesting. But one of the people was from EDF, was the head of the development of Hinkley Point C. Made really good arguments for nuclear. I mean, and I'm not opposed to it. But then, sorry, now I'm doing the thing where I can't remember the name, but it'll come to me.
It's all right, I'll wait. You learn patience as well in your old age, don't you? It's just as well. Really.
I've remembered it. Michael Leibrich. He was amazing, because he suddenly he went, oh no, you're absolutely. He was nodding all the right time. This man was explaining how this huge project was doing and how many people it was employing and how it was supporting the local economy. It was all very positive. And then he just listed this absolutely brutal list of time and over budget, and then having to turn them off because all that stuff. Just really, and just from a purely economic standpoint, not anti-nuclear at all. I'm sure he isn't. But I mean, I'm afraid that is my take: is how much does this cost, and how long is it going to take?
I'm exactly the same. I'm not completely, but I'm fairly agnostic about nuclear. I think there's three strands, and certainly I think it doesn't make sense to try and start building very large central infrastructure like Hinkley anymore, because Hinkley's massively overrun. Every nuclear construction around the world at the moment that's in train is massively overspent and massively over time on the project. Delayed, every single one. So delayed is the word. Thank you. So that's not going to help us certainly not in the next 10 or 15 years. Some of them are going to be 30 years out. So that's one thing. I also think it was fairly crazy for someone like Germany to start closing down perfectly serviceable nuclear power stations.
Did they not start them back up? I think they did start.
They've stopped. They've stopped a couple of them from stopping. If you know what I mean. Okay. Yeah. So they delayed the final sort of end date. But they had, as you know, last year or a couple of years ago started opening up their brown coal mines. I mean, how insane is that? Because they hadn't got the nuclear. So that was a knee-jerk reaction to Fukushima. Yeah. It was obviously very popular. The German people were very happy for it to happen, but it was a wrong thing to do when these things are perfectly serviceable for probably another 30, 40, maybe even 50 years. And then the third strand is these small nuclear modular reactors. And that's interesting. And China have already built one. So they're, as usual with China, they're ahead of the game. Obviously, we've got Rolls-Royce in this country who are doing their best to try and muster up some interest and support for it. And I think that they may be something, in my opinion, that could be useful to give us an extra buffer of base load energy for the green transition, while we're getting this, what I think should be an over proliferance of wind and solar. So we've got more than we need, so that it accounts for the load times. While we're doing that, we might need some of these small nuclear modular reactors to sort of to bolster that. Plus things like the long distance high voltage DC line from Morocco to the UK, which Xlinks are now putting in. So that brings into connectivity between those two areas. But someone raised a good point about if we really. I'm reluctant to sort of say they should be the answer rather than anything else, and let's just do thousands and thousands of those all over the world, outside every urban conurbation in the world, have its own little, reactor just to power that city. Sounds nice in theory, but we've already got 410, I think, nuclear power stations in the world. We'd have 410,000 of these things, maybe millions. And it doesn't take a long sort of leap of imagination to think, well, if you were in conflict with another country, what are they going to blow up first?
It's your target, yeah.
And that's a big risk. Yeah. Plus, if something terrible happens to civilizations, these things need to be managed in perpetuity. So if we do have civilizational breakdown that we might, then these things will go to rack and ruin, and then what happens? So there's a lot of all right. They're not sort massively of definitely going to happen, but they are not impossible.
They're not impossible,
and they should be built into the calculations. So
because it's also that it's always the cost thing. Because I got quite enthusiastic when I first heard about small modular nuclear reactors, kind of in a container, and we'll just bury it next to a housing estate, and it'll run 24 hours a day for 30 years without any stuff. And I was going, oh, that sounds amazing. And then there's one man I've known who was in the army, works in the Ministry of Defence, had worked in military procurement for the MOD, so knew how, and would occasionally let something slip about how much stuff costs. But I said that to him I had dinner with him, and I said, what about, because I'd filmed on a nuclear submarine in Faslane in Scotland, not out at sea, it was in moored, but we were filming how it works. So we were allowed to do torpedoes and air pressure. We weren't allowed to look or see the nuclear power plant that is on board. It's nuclear powered. Right. It wasn't a nuclear missiles on it. It was a hunter-killer submarine. Now I remember. And nice. I banged my head repeatedly, even though I was constantly warned not to bang my head. My head was a massive scar tissue when I came out of that submarine. And none of the people who live on it had one mark on their heads. They've all worked out how to do it. It's a lot of things to bang your head on. Anyway, so I had glanced. So I went down the stairs from the conning tower, like in a proper submarine, like in Hunt for Red October. So exciting! And I was told by an MOD like heavy duty military police officer at the top, when you get down the bottom of the stairs, turn to your right. And I went, yeah, all right. Do not turn to your left. I went, okay, no, I won't. All right, don't worry. So I got down, turned to my right, and then someone behind me went, Robert, can I have a selfie? Huge engineer, massive door open, behind him, the nuclear power plant of a nuclear submarine, the most top secret thing in the world. If I was tortured, I go, there were some white pipes and a round thing. I mean, but I was definitely not meant to see that. So I did a selfie, and in the back of that selfie is a nuclear power plant from the officer involved, which was a bit of a shock. But anyway, that was fine. But I'd seen that. It kind of stayed with me. And I said to my friend who was in the MOD, I said, why can't we just use those? They have proven themselves incredibly reliable, powerful. They produce an enormous amount of power. And he said, do you know how much they cost? And I went, no. And he said, nor do I, nor does anybody. He said there'd be 3 or 4 people in the world who know how much they cost, but I'll give you an estimate. And he used a rude word, a metric ton. Sorry, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say it's allocating that. There's a limited amount of resources, and it's allocating those resources, and that is part of the difficulty. But it's back to I suppose it's back to the short-term, long-term thinking. The cost of not doing these investments, and I call them investments rather than expenditure, really. The cost of not doing them, it will be far greater in the future than the cost of doing them now. Someone said, I think there was one calculation that by 2050 by 2050 we'll be spending about 3 or 4% of global GDP, and by 2100 more like 8% of global GDP on dealing with climate disasters if we don't do anything.
Right.
If the way on our current trajectory, that's the amount of 8% of global GDP just spent on fixing things up and replacing infrastructure and dealing with people that are dying all over the place.
Yeah.
As opposed to spending some billions, maybe even some trillions, in the short term to get a lot of adaptation and mitigation pursued, not just in, investing in green technology, but also the adaptation for these equatorial and tropical areas, so that people aren't dying in their gazillions. We can actually do something to help those people, either put green infrastructure in there so they can catapult over fossil fuels and go straight to green, or building simple things like seawalls and stuff, to help them and protect them from these things.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge of governments, is finding a way to allocate the resources.
Yeah. I think the flip side of the challenge of nuclear is and I think I was really intrigued to see that you'd covered this, because it's something we're about to really go into, is solar panels. Because one of the great things at the moment is, if you look at the quantity of solar panels being installed around the world, I mean, obviously mainly in China, but elsewhere around the world, it is mind-boggling. It's huge. Yeah. I've got a load of them here. And I've got no worries. They'll outlast me. These solar panels will still be producing electricity long after I've popped my clogs.
Yeah.
But what happens then? Because it's not like, it's a bit like we did the little thing. I don't know if you saw it, but the episode we did about Apple iPhone recycling. Yes. And you go, well, it's a lot of hassle just for, and then you go, oh, there's 2.2 billion of these in the world. My God, that is a train loads of iPhones all crammed together in boxes.
Indeed.
Doesn't describe it. It's just mind-boggling how much material's in that. But the same thing is with, I mean, who knows how many solar panels have been manufactured now, but it's presumably in the billions. It's got to be, isn't it?
I would have thought so. Yeah.
What do we do with them all?
Yeah. I mean, the first point is the one you raised, which is these things will almost certainly last an awful lot longer than what's written on the tin, if you like, than the 30 years that are stipulated for warranties and things like that. Yeah. There's people that contact me that have had old-fashioned solar panels since the late 70s, and they're still producing electricity.
They're still working. Wow.
Wow. And so they'll last a long, long time. So that's number one. But they will come to the end of their operational lifetime at some point, and there will be gazillions of them, as you rightly say. And the last time I looked at recycling and the recycling industry, I asked a lot of questions about why aren't we ready for this? And the general consensus was because right now we don't yet need to be, because there aren't enough of them coming to the end of their operational lifetimes. Yeah. But the general view was we are getting ready, and there are corporations and governments around the world are organizing themselves to have recycling infrastructure in place, probably from 2030 onwards. Yeah. That will deal with these old panels, so that they must not go into landfill. Yeah. That would be absolutely crazy. So governments are aware of that. So let's take China, because they're always the biggest. Yeah. China and America, actually, let's take them both. They both have government, deep government understanding of that coming issue, and they both have very serious plans in place, both government-led and commercially, to put those recycling plants in place. And even in China, there's some commercial competition already sort of welling up there, where people are trying to steal a march and get up to the top of the market. So, which is a good thing. That's how sometimes capitalism can be useful, because it does drive that sort of useful competition. But also, it's I don't want to get too much into the wider argument, but I've started to get dragged down a bit of a rabbit warren of looking at the what you can't really talk about climate change or investigate climate change without thinking a little bit about politics and economics. Yeah, and economics is the one that I'm not an economist at all. Yeah. But I've tried to sort of more recently learn about the technicalities of economics and how we got ourselves into this capitalistic economic paradigm and how we can get out of it. Right. And a lot of people are arguing about what the best way for that is. But we've all heard about circular economies, and keeping materials inside a circular loop. And there's a great book called The Donut Donut Economics by Kate Rayworth, actually, which I would implore all your listeners to get a copy of and read. And it's a really she's an economist, a renegade economist, she describes herself as, and she's brilliant. And it describes a way of think of two concentric circles, and the inner circle is the smallest economy you can have to allow for looking after the vulnerable and having a health service and schools and all the things you need in an economy. So you can't let your economy contract any smaller than that. But then there's an outer circle, which is the limit to Earth's resources. Yeah. And we're currently smashing that to pieces all over the place at the moment. And she's saying what we need to do is rein in our economic.
I sort of got the circular notion of a donut, but what she's describing is the sort of inner ring and the outer ring, and we've got to operate within that
Correct. Within those two rings, in the donut. That's exactly right, Robert. Yeah. That's where we've got to be. And economies can go up and down a bit. They can grow and contract a little bit within that ring, within that donut.
Yeah.
But the growth shouldn't be the obsession, which it is at the moment.
And it has been really all our lives, hasn't it? It's
all our lives, yeah. Since the early part of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Since mercantilism, I think the old system was mercantilism, which is basically sell as many goods exporting. And import as few goods as possible and hoard all your gold, because gold was real in those days, and but then when we disassociated everything from the gold standard, and dollars and pounds weren't associated with actual numbers of gold, you just pressed a number in a computer and made lots more pounds appear, which is quantitative easing and all that nonsense. It's all based on the never. And that all changed. So capitalist economies are what we've got, and she's saying what she describes as the current paradigm is economies that grow regardless of whether they allow us to thrive. And what we need are economies that allow us to thrive regardless of whether or not they grow. So the obsession should be human and other species welfare first. And then if economies grow within that paradigm, then that's great.
That's fine. Yeah.
And like everything in the world, it works very well if everyone joins in.
Yes.
Not so well if not everyone joins in, and that's the problem.
Yeah. No, it is hugely problematic.
But I think just to finish that point on solar panels, I'm quite hopeful, Robert. Essentially, that's the summary of that. I don't see a huge problem. Obviously, there's a lot of resources involved in making millions of solar panels, but we will recycle them. The technology is moving so fast. That we'll have technologies then that are brilliant at recycling solar panels, and they'll be. It'll be a circular loop, just like the Apple phones you described in that video you made.
Yeah. No, I mean, I did think the fact that I came away from that, seeing that thing, because it was slightly out of our, normal neck of the woods, but it was that their commitment, and we'll have to see if they stick to it, was by 2025, they will not use any freshly mined cobalt. They will only use the cobalt from their recycling process. Which is amazing, because they're going to be using cobalt in small electronics for, no one's yet come around with that. Like we're seeing now car batteries with zero cobalt. I think we'll see more of that. But that also leads us on to I just think it's, I don't know if you had a chance to look at that link, but the story, I just love what's happened with Toyota. Like a year ago, Toyota was the bête noire of the EV industry. They're never going to do EVs. Hydrogen is the future. We're going to do hybrids, and it's EVs. They don't satisfy the customer. All the nonsense and lobbying, really actively lobbying against climate change proposals all around, in technology. And they flipped so dramatically. So their announcement of, I mean, who knows if they'll do it by 2025? I think solid state batteries in cars. Yeah. Longer lasting, cheaper, longer range, blah, blah, blah.
I also noticed recently, I think it was only last week, I saw an announcement that Mr. Toyoda, who is the great-grandson of the founder of Toyota, has, I think, just retired.
Yes,
I think,
he's gone.
As the head of the whole business. And he was a very autocratic leader who was dictating all these policies. And I just had this lovely vision of everyone in Toyota going, oh, thank Christ, he's gone. Can we get on with EVs now, for God's sake?
Yes, that's what it sounds like. I mean, who knows what's really going on, but it really does. It is so shockingly such a turnaround. And it also, I mean, just from a really, inside baseball position, I had a lot to do with Toyota when I was doing the kind of early shows I was making. Like Carpool, I did in a Prius, because that was, it was a really good car too. It was really quiet. It had a windscreen that was a long way from the passenger, so you could put a camera in the corner and see everything. Yeah. There was a lot of it, and I loved it. I had, that was my transitionary vehicle. And Toyota were amazing to work with. They were really supportive. They were really, it was great. Yeah. And then it went. Yeah. It was a bit like a sort of falling out with an ex-go. It went really sour. So we're never invited to it. They don't want to have anything to do with us. Not just sort of now. Which is like, it doesn't matter. In the grand scheme of things, even I accept that a fully charged relationship with Toyota is not pivotal to the survival of the human race.
Maybe now's the time for a change, Robert. Perhaps they'll come knocking on the door.
One can live in hope. But it is a remarkable, I don't know what it does. I don't know whether it says anything. But it does feel like we might, because I'm always full of doubt. I always think, well, maybe battery electric isn't the answer.
Yeah,
And maybe hydrogen is maybe hydrogen combustion would be really sensible. And I'm completely open to it. I've always said if I'm cycling along a road in a city and a hydrogen bus goes past me, I'm happy. If a hydrogen car does, I'd love it. Be fine. If and if a diesel bus goes past, we know what that's like. It's horrible.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So
I agree. And hydrogen will, no doubt about it, hydrogen will play some part in the move away from fossil fuels. And I think and we all know the arguments. Well, you and I certainly do, and I know a lot of our viewers and listeners do as well. But the worry with hydrogen is the fact that 99% of all hydrogen in the world today is produced by bombarding methane with steam and knocking the carbon and hydrogen out and putting carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And almost none of it is captured with this thing called blue hydrogen. It virtually doesn't exist. And anyway, even if it did, the fugitive emissions from pipe work and the amount of energy needed to run the carbon capture is so great that you need loads of energy. You may as well burn the methane rather than make the hydrogen.
Yeah.
And so that's the current situation. And that's why I think a lot of people, myself included, worry that all this encouragement to start making lovely green hydrogen, which is electrolysis of water, where you split off the hydrogen and the oxygen from the water, which is great, is being massively encouraged and even invested in by fossil fuel industries. If you were a cynical person, which of course we're not, Robert, but if you were, you'd think, well, perhaps the fossil fuel industry are thinking, well, once we get that up and running and we get the industry, all industries, to be reliant on hydrogen in the way they are reliant on fossil fuels today, then when we suddenly find out we can't make all that hydrogen from green hydrogen, what a shame. We can still make it from methane, though, so we can still do that. Then they've got a captive audience. And that's the worry with hydrogen, I think, fundamentally.
Yeah.
And then there's the second question of producing hydrogen through green electrolysis takes a massive amount of energy. And that's electrical energy from let's say it's from wind turbines and solar power. That's great. Why don't we just use that electrical energy and stick it in batteries and drive cars with that and then cut out the middleman? You're saving 50 or 60% of efficiency.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's one kind of good argument I've heard for using excess renewables, which I don't think we have yet. I think, there's moments in the day when we've had excess renewables. They're pretty rare. We need a lot more excess, but to use that to split water, to store hydrogen for long-term energy storage, yes, there's potentially, but the losses involved are gargantuan. It makes pumped storage, where you're pushing water up a hill, it makes that look positively super efficient.
It does. In fact, pumped storage, I think, has got a glowing future. There's reports just out recently that have found sort of 15,000 different sites in America and another 17,000 around the world where pumped storage is technically really feasible. And, as long as it doesn't destroy the environment around it, because it's not dams, it's not like hydroelectric, so you're not sticking a dam in a river. As long as they're produced away from rivers, so you're protecting the wildlife. If it's just a reservoir at the top of a hill and another reservoir at the bottom, and you let the water run down a hill, you're doing very minimal damage, if any. Yeah. And that's a very, very, very useful and usually very large source of energy storage. So in fact, I will be making a video on that in the next few weeks on pumped hydro. To see where it's at, because it's changed a lot. Even in the last 2 or 3 years, the perception of it seems to have changed in the industry. Everything's changing so fast, isn't it, Robin? That's the thing.
Yeah. Yes. No, I can't retire.
You can't. It's far too interesting.
But then, so the other one, then let's quickly do, because I like the idea of, the material. So, the two questions I'd love to go is your take on battery recycling, because clearly that is at the moment a massive growth industry. That seems to be a really big thing. Again, is there a big battery recycling plant in the UK? I don't know if there is, or is there plans for one? Because
not that I'm aware of at the moment, not a huge one.
Because I mean, it is that thing where in, say, 15, 20 years' time, there's going to be a huge amount of electric vehicles on the road in the UK whose batteries have come to the end of life. Well, do we then put them on a ship to send them to North America, Europe, China to be recycled? Which is like, for goodness sake, guys, can we do that here?
And this is exactly what I mean. We might possibly have a change of administration between now and then, Robert. Who knows? Who knows?
I'm sure not.
I wouldn't
The
like
current administration are beyond perfection.
rock solid. Who would vote against them? Yeah, exactly. But you never know, do you? Things change in politics. We might just have another administration, and they might just have slightly more sensible ideas about building infrastructure in the United Kingdom to make us a bit more self-sufficient. So let's get battery makers, let's get battery recyclers, let's get charging infrastructure. I think charging infrastructure should be a government-led project, not left to commercial, entities. So you've got 16 different apps and 3 different charging bloody plugs to plug in, and you need a degree in social media to charge your vehicle up. That's just you just want to go drive your vehicle up, plug it in, go for a coffee in the Waz, and come back and drive off.
Yeah,
which you can do with Teslas.
It's just Teslas that it's just when you use a Tesla, you just go, oh God, why is it all got to be so difficult? But even actually, to be fair, it's not even to be fair. It's just to be annoying. I've used Tesla superchargers now on an MG4, and I have the Tesla app. But you walk up, you plug the car in, you open the Tesla app, and you go, charge it, whatever. One button, and it's charging, and you walk away. It's so easy. It's so ridiculously simple and straightforward, and they always work. Why can they do it?
And in America, this is what Munro was talking about it. You've talked to Munro, haven't you, before? And he was talking about that the other day. He was saying exactly the same thing. They just, if they say there's a charger in a location and it's available, it is available, and it'll work. And now Ford and GM, as you've seen, I'm sure, in America, have decided to adopt their plug standard, the Tesla plug standard. So that's a challenge to CCS. That might become a global standard. Who knows? I'd be quite happy if one thing became a standard. And it sounds like Tesla's quite good. I haven't got a car. My sister's got a Tesla, so I know a little bit about it. And
but you're sorry, when you said that, you are so much more in advance of anyone else. All the fancy pants EV drivers who go, well, I drive an EV because it helps the planet. The planet doesn't give a toss, but you haven't got a car, Dave, and that is the best way.
Yeah, the best way is buy a bicycle.
Yes, you've got a bicycle. Damn it!
And I love my bicycle, and I take a train for longer journeys, and it's as simple as that. That is the best way. But I don't. I've made a conscious decision not to get on a pulpit and lecture people about that, because obviously different people have different lives and different necessities, and some people just can't get by without a car because their life wouldn't be workable the way it is. And we have to recognise that. The whole Rethink X thing, you've spoken to Tony Sieber. I find that very interesting. Transportation as a service in the future, where you just press an app and an unmanned vehicle thing arrives, you get in it, it takes you to your place, and it drives off again, and you get on with your life. I quite like that future image.
That's my favorite fantasy of autonomous vehicles. I don't want to be driven in an autonomous vehicle. I'm very happy to drive it myself, but I want it to turn up where I am with no one in it. I get in it, I drive it. I mean, when you talk to it's the insurance industry that are very keen on that option, because they know then when it's being driven with no one in it, one, it's safer because it can destroy itself if there's a dangerous situation. So that doesn't matter. It doesn't have to protect anyone in the vehicle. And they can insure that. And that's the maker of the vehicle would insure that. And then when I get in it, it's my responsibility. I'm in charge. I'm liable as an insurance person. Yeah. And it makes, but also the idea, you go to a shop and you go outside the shop and you get your shopping bags or your trolley. And you go off, and the car you don't even think about it. The car's just gone. It's doing someone else, or it's charging, or whatever. And then you come out and you go, I've got all my shopping. Where's a car? Oh, there it is. I'll get in it and drive it home. And then it goes away. You don't have a car. It's wonderful.
You've just given me an image of you trundling out of Sainsbury's, one of those little tartan shoppers.
Yeah, I want a tartan
maybe with
shopper.
a little scarf over your head.
Well, if it's a windy day.
Beans are 20% off this week. They're fantastic.
I used my club card and I got a 10% reduction. It's embarrassing. But the trouble is, I'm nearly there now. I'm very close. I haven't yet got a tartan wheelie shopper, but I'm sure it's a big good idea. But
just recycling in America. Let's to get serious and answer the question. So, for example, Redwood Materials, JB Straubel, the ex-CEO of Tesla, he's on the case. There are 4 or 5 really already. Li-Cycle, I think there's one called Recycle.
Yeah.
There's 3 or 4 in America and Canada who are already quite big and are really ramping up, getting ready for battery recycling. They not because they're wonderfully altruistic, climate advocates. I'm sure they are, but because they spot an amazing business opportunity when they know there's going to be gazillions of batteries in 20 years' time, 15 probably, and they can see a massive opportunity in selling those raw materials back into the industry. And so it will be, and that is a quintessential circular economy.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that was, I remember seeing a bit of video footage from when they first started properly operating at Redwood Materials, and it was the huge sort of forklift trucks, big scale kind of metal cages that would have been, 2 meters cube, sort of huge thing, and full of flip phones and little, all the phones, just millions of phones. And you go, of course. We've had all these, when you think, oh, well, I've got an iPhone. Well, did you ever have a Nokia? Oh, yeah, I think so. Can't remember. Where have they all gone? I mean, I've had probably 10 or 12 phones in my life, cell phones, and I'm probably not, is that many?
Yeah,
so
sure
somewhere there's 10 phones that I did have. I don't even know where they are. It's frightening, but I mean, the sheer quantity of those things.
There's no incentive to take them back. That's the other key thing. So, like old-fashioned things, like taking a glass bottle back, you got 6 pence back on your bottle when you took your bottle back. It's quite simple. Give people whatever it might be, a fiver or something, when they take a phone back to Tesco's and stick it in a box in Tesco's. You get a fiver out of the machine, and that way people will do it. But at the moment, there's no incentive to do that. So everyone, or most people, hoard their phones, thinking, well, I've got this was a value. When I bought this phone, it was either added 30 quid a month onto my contract, or I actually spent hundreds of pounds buying it. Even though it's old and I've replaced it, it still has a value to me because I spent money on it. I don't want to just give it to somebody. So let's incentivize people to do the right thing.
Yeah. Well, that would mean, of course, Apple, as just picking one company at random, would maybe reduce their annual profits by $250 million as opposed to the 700 billion they make every 2 days.
Yeah, it's not even a rounding error, is it?
No. I mean, it's
in a spreadsheet,
make not a lot of difference. Yeah.
No.
I'm trying not to. I don't want to end on something depressing, but I want to talk. I do want to talk about the Arctic for 2 reasons. One, a friend of ours just flew back from Japan, and you literally head north from Japan and go right over the Arctic, and they didn't see any ice. They just saw sea, which is a little bit worrying. They saw snow and ice in, on the kind of Alaskan, wherever that would be, sort of really far
Canadian
north,
archipelago and all around
the ground. There was snow, but not on. They said the sea. They just saw blue sea, for hours. Which I don't know. I mean, who knows? I don't know. But I know quite a few people who've been there in the past. Helen Chesky, who works on Fully Charged Show, is very knowledgeable about the fact that there's no ice in the summer, which is
yes. So how to make that an optimistic ending?
Yes,
there is a challenge for me. So the Arctic, I'll try, but I'm not sure I'll get there. So the Arctic is warming on average about at least 3 times faster than the global average, and in some areas 7 or 8 times faster.
Wow.
Over on the East Siberian Arctic Shelf, it's 7 or 8 times faster.
Wow.
And so you've got Arctic amplifications. So you lose ice, you lose the albedo, the reflectivity of the ice. So there's less sunlight being reflected. The sunlight gets absorbed by dark black water, which warms up, melts more ice, and you've got a feedback loop, which gets exponential. That's one thing. And then we've got the wandering jet stream because the differential of heat between the hot middle of the planet and the cold top of the planet, heat rises and hot goes to cold. So the heat tends to travel towards the cold from the equator to the poles, and because the Earth spins in a clockwise whichever direction, that air goes with the planet, and that's what winds are, and that's what the jet stream is, which is why it's faster to travel from New York to London than it is to travel from London to New York, because the wind's coming that way. It's the jet stream. Right. But as that heat differential diminishes as the Arctic warms up rapidly, 3 or 4 times more quickly than the rest of the world, there's less impetus for that heat transfer to move. Wow. So the jet stream slows down and gets more wavy, and as those great big meandering waves, they can stall, so they don't travel around the planet so quickly, so that you can get a big lump across above, let's say, America, drawing lots of hot air up from the equator, making America very hot. And right next to it, where that sine wave, if you like, goes into a trough, it draws all the cold air
down.
back down from the Arctic, and you can get very cold regions. But those ups and downs are becoming more accentuated, so more hot air is being drawn into the Arctic region, and that's exacerbating the problem as well. Plus, you've got many more wildfires across Siberia and Canada and all around the Arctic Circle, obviously chucking carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And then you've got permafrost thaw across the tundra, releasing methane. And when the bugs start eating it, they do it anaerobically and they release methane into the atmosphere. Right. It's reckoned there's about 1,500 billion tons worth of carbon dioxide equivalent held under the ground in methane, and there's something called methane hydrates, which is a water-based version that's just held down under the water in the Arctic Circle as well. If that all came up, that would be another big hit. So there's lots of things going on in the Arctic that are feedback loops that are self-accelerating things and causing lots of tipping points. And it's probably it's almost certainly past the point of no return. In terms of the Arctic sea ice in the summer, there's been people speculating on Arctic ice-free Arctic seas in the summertime for ages, and we haven't got there yet.
Right.
And by the way, ice-free is regarded as less than 1 million square kilometres, which sounds like a massive amount. But
I see. So it doesn't mean no ice at all. It just means
it doesn't. But the whole area, I think in the winter there's something like 16 million square kilometres that fills up that area. So that 1 million square kilometres, it's not one big chunk in the middle.
Right.
It's little tiny pockets of ice here and there that do, that play no useful role whatsoever. Yeah. But they added up, they could add up to about 1 million square kilometres because it's such a massive area.
Yeah.
So anything less than that is regarded as effectively ice-free to all intents and purposes. We're nowhere near that yet. I think last summer we were about 4 million square kilometres. And that's one of the lowest amounts. But it's on a downward cycle, and it won't be long. It won't be many more yet. And now we've got an El Nino kicking up in the Pacific, which is going to hit the Earth by at least 0.2 or 0.3 more degrees Celsius this year and next year. That could tip the world into a point where it briefly goes over the 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, which is a disaster. And it could tip the Arctic Ocean into an ice-free status in perhaps summer 2024. I'm just trying to look for the optimistic part of that, Robert. I'm not sure what that was. Sorry.
It's devastating, isn't it? I mean, it really is terrible. I mean, and I think that's the flip side of it is it's, there's a side of me that goes, I may as well just get a V8 with a turbo because it's too late. In a way, there's that side of it where you go, we've stuffed it, we've screwed it up.
And that's why I say our future humans are a problem. They are our problem, and it's never too late to stop trying. That's what I'd implore viewers and listeners to think about. It doesn't matter how egregious the situation seems to be. Anything you can do as an individual or as a group, as a community, as a council, or even as a parliament or as a world leader, do it. Whatever you can do do it. Don't ever think I'm just a drop in the ocean. The ocean's made up of drops. So if everyone thought, what's the point, then we'd all fail. Yeah. And stopping and giving up is an absolute 100% guarantee of failure. So absolutely don't give up. That's what I'd say to people listening and watching. Keep going. Do more, actually. The worse it gets, the more important it is to do more.
Well, I really hope you enjoyed that. Do have a look at Dave's channel. Just have a think. It's really good. He releases, I think, an episode a week, and they're really well thought out and really a real delight to watch and listen to. He's very, very good. And we didn't do geothermal energy. That's what we realized after we finished. That was one of the things we really wanted to talk about, and we forgot. So that means, to me, it's time to get Dave Borlace back on the Fully Charged Show podcast. ASAP. But I really hope you enjoyed that. Do join us again next week. Do the 5-star review thing if you want to. A little old subscribe thing, tell your friends, etc., etc., etc. And as always, if you have been, thank you for listening.